I guess starting out, something that I find super strange have ever since I started watching YouTube videos and especially creating them is how advice-centric the language learning YouTube niche is. Having been a YouTube watcher for, a long time, obviously, there are so many other niches that don't really have this, I guess you could call it an issue, I don't know, don't have these same characteristics. But something I was thinking about that could be relevant is that I think that like beauty YouTube used to essentially just be tutorials, and eventually it became a lot more than just that. It became, get readies with me's, product reviews, and hauls and anti-hauls, and just all kinds of different types of videos where maybe originally that was not the way that it is. Now I feel like most niches have a variety of types of videos, and so does the language learning community, and we will talk about that. But I think especially a couple years ago, but still now, people default to advice videos, and they often feel like that's the only thing that you can make in this niche. In fact, I actually just heard someone, I think it was Days of French and Swedish or whatever his channel name is now, say this in a video recently, that like if you don't have new advice to give, it can be difficult to have content to create in this niche, which I don't agree with. But if you don't want to make any of those other types of content, then yes, that's probably true. So it's just so, like, this was part of why I initially did not make a language learning specific channel. When I first started YouTube, my channel was books and language learning, and it was only after like a couple years that I separated the channels because I kind of felt comfortable in this niche and had a lot of videos that I wanted to make, and it made more sense to have a dedicated channel. But at first I was like, well, I don't think I have like that many things to say, like really when I first started, I feel like Polyglot Progress was one of the only people in the community making videos that were more like lifestyle content in language learning, which I'm sure there were others, but it certainly was not as common as it is now. So that was kind of, shout out to Abigail for making me feel like I had, something to make in the niche. But even now, you will see so many people start a channel and just right off the bat, they are making advice videos, even if maybe they're, learning, very commonly Spanish, but it can also be, Japanese, Korean, whatever, maybe their first language, and that's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. If you feel like you have advice to give, then go for it. But I think a lot of times people want to have a language learning channel and they just default to advice content as that's what this niche is, where I don't think that has to be that way. So this is going to be a rather aimless, wandering discussion video. Really, I want to kind of open a conversation. So absolutely leave your thoughts in the comments, and hopefully this will be, kind of an ongoing topic of conversation on the channel. Like, obviously, there's a good amount of conversation about the language learning community that happens, kind of this meta conversation. Usually it's about controversial things like scammers, fake polyglots, or like shocking the natives type content. Those are good conversations to have, absolutely. But I think there are also conversations to be had even among like the normal content creators who aren't necessarily doing any of those things. So anyway, I made a list of kind of types of content that I think exist, could exist, etc. in the language learning niche. And obviously a lot of these have huge crossovers, gray areas, and I'm sure I'm missing some. So actually I just thought of one that I'm missing right now. So the first two are kind of their own type of content, and that would be teaching a language. So explicitly like, don't say this in English, say this, or like the subjunctive in Spanish, those kind of videos. And then comprehensible input, so videos that are made explicitly to be easier for language learners to understand in their target language. So those two obviously are part of the language learning niche, but they're not necessarily what we're going to talk about today. There's also teaching how to learn. So videos about language acquisition, language techniques, not so much like advice, but as literally, this is how you should learn, blah, blah, blah. Then there is also advice, so kind of more strategies, personal experiences, that kind of thing. Material, media, app review type content, so I do quite a bit of this type of content. There's lifestyle language content, which is obviously a big range, but naturally like vlogs, that sort of thing. Productivity content. There's obviously the productivity niche in and of itself, but there's kind of a language learning specific corner of that. There is Shock the Natives content. Then there's this kind of meta content where drama would fit into this video would fit into this, any kind of discussion about the language learning community. Then the one that I just thought of that I didn't have in here is progress updates. So like whether that would be Polyglot Speaks in 9 languages or just like, here's an update on my German, those kind of things. Again, there's obviously huge amounts of gray areas between these or just kind of crossover. So like goal videos could be fully lifestyle if they are just talking about your personal goals and how that's gone and everything. They could also be advice if that's how you're framing them. Comprehensible input also often teaches you how to learn a language, like Dreaming Spanish would be one of those where it's fully comprehensible input, but they also have videos teaching you how to learn a language. Lifestyle often also has advice built into it. So this is what I came up with. And obviously channels can do multiple, many, all of these, or just one maybe. So I think that's something that's kind of useful to consider because you will hear so often people say that we should be listening to the experts in language learning instead of listening to YouTubers and that sort of thing. And in general, that sounds really good. And I think in other areas, especially, that can be really important, like the medical field and that sort of thing. Obviously, they are not infallible either because nobody is, but in general, there are fields where absolutely you should be generally listening to experts, not randos on the internet. Language learning and other kind of hobbies can be a little bit more of a gray area, I think, because you get into all kinds of interesting dilemmas when you try to consider what is an expert. And then I think because language learning is such a developing field still, not that any fields aren't still developing, but the experts don't necessarily agree. Like I would say, honestly, most of the people that I follow on YouTube who have linguistics or that type of degree disagree with each other the most, maybe. And so, it can be difficult to listen to the experts, even if you do find the experts, because they don't necessarily agree with each other than like very, very generic things like language learning is a very complex process with many variables that is going to take a significant amount of investment of time in the language, which yes, absolutely, I think we can all agree on that. That's not very practical, not very actionable. Then, of course, you get into, do you need a formal education to be an expert? And if so, how do you then combat the fact that that's an extremely restrictive standard to have given the economic and availability restrictions of a formal education, and the fact that effectively weeds out anybody who, isn't able to access that, who maybe isn't interested in doing this professionally, but still has a big interest in learning languages, which is a very different thing than learning about languages can be at least a very different thing. Then, of course, inherently also the fact that the institutions that will be teaching them these things are also inherently biased and very elitist, racist, classist, sexist. So, the work coming out of those institutions is going to probably be impacted by that. So, there are obviously a huge amount of variables here, and I love watching and listening to experts. And if you have ones that you enjoy listening to, absolutely leave them in the comments, because I often just listen to hours of interviews with academics and that sort of thing in this field. But I think saying you should only listen to them is maybe more complex than it sounds at first glance. Then on the other hand, as far as language learning goes, I always feel like people should do what they enjoy doing, because ultimately that's how you're going to stick with it. That's how you're going to enjoy the process and actually follow through on it. And I would love to feel the same way about content creators, I would love to just be do your own thing, don't worry about it. But it is more complicated than that, because if you are putting out content in any niche, you're putting something out into the world that is going to take on a life of its own, is going to impact people in ways that you can't necessarily foresee. And that is low-key terrifying, but also a responsibility. And so for people to be putting out advice when they don't necessarily have what they need to back that up, whatever we maybe as a community decide that should be, that is potentially a problem. And I think there's a lot of people putting out things that are harmless, maybe, people putting out advice that is fairly obviously their experience and nobody's going to take that too seriously. But there are also people putting out things that are extremely strict, that are extremely embedded in a certain mindset. And something that I've noticed is that most communities that center around a company or a figure in the language learning space take that person or company's perspectives to the extreme. If you look at the original material put out by that person or organization or whatever, it's not as strict or as stringent as the community turns it into, which is odd. You'd almost think it would be the opposite, but that does not seem to be the way that it is. And so I think that that's very important to consider when you are the person putting out the information, that whatever you're saying, potentially, depending on how, embedded your community gets, could be intensified quite a bit. So not that you want to water down your message or whatever the case may be, but really, really emphasizing any kind of, compassion for yourself or just flexibility or whatever the case may be. And maybe they don't want to do that, and so that's, a different thing. But I think if you're a content creator who is trying to do that, that's important to consider. So anyway, in preparing for this video, I kind of wanted to get more people's perspectives than just mine. And so I did make a survey that I posted on Instagram and my community tab and on a Discord that I am part of. And so we'll look at the polls on this survey. And so I did try to keep the questions quite neutral, not make my own opinion clear in the question. And I tried to ask about things that I see stated often, like we should be listening to experts, or learning a language does not qualify you to give advice about a language. Or on the other hand, you'll often see people say, well, Steve Kaufman or whatever has learned all these languages, so clearly he's qualified. So I just kind of wanted to get people's takes on those. The question, do you distinguish between experts and influencers or other content creators? Roughly 36% yes, 9% no, and 55% yes, but there's a gray area. Do you have criteria for which language learning experts you watch or listen to? I cut off the number here, but it's got to be around 5%. Yes, I want them to have formal training or education. 59% yes, but it's pretty vibe-based, and 36% no, not really, I will watch anyone I enjoy. Then this one you could have multiple selections. So what do you think of paying influencers for language learning services? The most people said I would for community-related things like book clubs, Zoom meetups, etc. Next number of people said I would for language-specific things like instruction, grammar guides, etc. Then the next most was I would not ever. And lastly, I would for coaching or general guidance. Then I kind of messed up the way that I did the poll on this one, but do you think learning one or more languages to fluency qualifies you to make advice videos? And kind of aggregating these responses approximately based on the content of the response, it was about 64% yes, 23% no, and 13% it really just depends. I had several text boxes where people could kind of elaborate on those questions, or additionally, thank you so much to everybody who responded. I wish that I could read all of these, but we would be here for quite some time. I think the general trend that people talked about was feeling like, yes, obviously there is some difference between being an expert and not being an expert. You can see that obviously in the poll response as well. Like it was like 90% of people agreed that like whether it's, cut and dry or not, at some point, some people are experts and some people are not experts. There may be some gray area in between, but people mainly emphasized, that people just need to give adequate kind of disclaimers, not present themselves as experts if they're not, or just specifically say, this is what worked for me, or, those kind of things. But largely that most people seem to just get more credibility purely by just getting more followers, and that doesn't obviously necessarily correlate to their actual expertise. So you should always, have kind of a sense of common sense, or, just like a filter built in when you're watching. I think kind of the one that divided people the most, reaching fluency in a language, qualifying you to make advice videos. I feel like people did have somewhat conflicting views on that. Like one person explicitly said that they are a Dutch speaker who is fluent in English and didn't feel like they would be qualified. And then some people were like, anybody can make anything that they want, which obviously, yes, like I wasn't saying that people literally should not be able to make these videos, but there's kind of a point at which like people could consider whether they should make those videos or not. And there wasn't really any consensus, I don't feel like. I think more than half of the people did seem to think, yes, make the video, but just make sure that you put yourself in your context to the viewer. Tanya from Instagram and YouTube had notes that like, I swear, Tanya, that I made my notes before I read these responses, because it's no wonder that I like your videos, because apparently we are on the same brainwave. Some of her response are like almost exactly the same as my notes, but she's talked about how it is such a heterogeneous group that it's hard to speak of as a whole. There's, smaller channels that are more community based. There's language coaches. There's enthusiasts who also monetize their channel, people who teach languages, linguists, etc. I feel like each of those groups deserves to exist because it's great for diversity of content and perspectives, but at the same time, almost each one can be problematic in its own way. Reasons why I watch language learning content on YouTube that go beyond just getting advice: motivation to continue learning, sense of community, getting exposed to other people's language learning methods. Yes. And then she talked about academic credentials and how this is another very good point about studies and how experimental studies are often done in very specific conditions, and we have to be careful not to overgeneralize their results. Say there's a study that shows that flashcards are not effective. What kind of flashcards? What are they doing after or before the flashcards? What else is the person doing in general? Blah, blah, blah. I think this is so important, and also something that is kind of one of those catch-22s about being an expert. And so I think another way of kind of outside of formal education or just your own personal experience that people will try to, and myself included, try to like do your own research on these kind of topics and read studies. And so I have an undergraduate degree in STEM, and I know just enough to know that I do not know how to read research studies effectively. And I think a lot of people, and this is not at any shade at anybody who uses studies in their videos or, reads them obviously and draws conclusions from them, but I think it's very important to know your own limitations as far as again, you don't know the quality of the study or what motivations were behind the study, if someone was sponsoring it or something. And as well, it is very difficult to read academic studies when you are not an academic, because they use language that exists only in their circle. You can argue that they do this on purpose. It is, to some extent useful for them to have this whole other set of terminology and everything, but it does make it very inaccessible for most people. And I think, just as an example, something that I see people do a lot who don't necessarily know, and to be fair, I have not seen any content creators do this, but you'll see Reddit comments or YouTube comments do it, something like statistically significant results. That does not mean what that means in normal English. In normal English, statistically significant results, you can know what each of those words mean and think that you know what the phrase means, but in research, that means something completely different. In statistics, if you've ever taken a stats course, you may already know that just means that it basically is unlikely to be random. You have gotten on the elevator, you are allowed to begin your journey now because of this. It is not what people think it is. And so you'll see people say, and again, not so much in language learning, but you'll see it in other sectors, say well, these were statistically significant results, and that's not what that means. And there are just so many things like that we may not even know as just lay people reading studies, that what it sounds like it means is not necessarily what it actually means. So anyway, that was a bunny trail, but yes, I think even under the best of conditions, like Tanya is saying here, if you're able to read the study and correctly interpret the study and everything, that still may not give you realistic, actionable advice, because by their very nature, studies are so narrowly focused. So yeah, this one was funny as an answer to the question, what do you think about language experts? And this person said mostly polybros mansplaining. They said they will watch anyone they enjoy, but only if they seem to know their shit regardless of formal training. I have a degree in linguistics, but I also value lay knowledge. And it's so funny because I always forget that is kind of true of the language learning community, because I don't watch those people. I do get suggested some of that type of content on my homepage, but ordinarily that's so far removed from what I'm normally watching that it just doesn't even come up for me. Same with the Shock the Natives content. I always forget that is even a thing, because I never get that content on YouTube. But yeah, I think overall the common thread in all of these responses was that people do prefer when someone shares their own journey versus trying to position themselves as an expert or position themselves as this giver of advice. It's much more enjoyable and also useful when people just are, sharing the journey. And I think that's so interesting, given how that's kind of the opposite of what you often see, exactly what I was talking about at the very beginning of this video, how everyone kind of seems to start out on this, I need to be making advice videos, when that may not even be what people are wanting to watch, let alone what you should be making specifically. Again, this isn't a video with a particular agenda, but I think the last thing that I wanted to talk about for at least this episode of the conversation is just kind of ways that I have started more critically watching. And that's not to say that I watch content in order to pick it apart. That's not fun at all, and I don't want to do that. But I think there is, there are trends that I have noticed that have made it almost impossible for me to watch certain types of content, just because it's so obviously one type of content couched as another type of content. So I'll talk about some examples. So like I mentioned earlier, like the lifestyle content that is actually advice content, I think again is so prevalent, and there's nothing inherently wrong with this. Like you totally can do this and it can be a great video, you know, like a week in my life language learning vlog that is actually kind of giving advice about how to improve your speaking or whatever. But there's a point at which that becomes, if you want to make an advice video, make an advice video. If you want to make a week in my life studying video, make a week in my life studying video. At some point feels infantilizing to me, and this is something that may not bother other people at all, but there are certain people who make videos that are very obviously existing only to give advice, but they know that potentially it might get more clicks as a vlog. Maybe. I don't know if that's why they do it, but that seems to be why they do it. There's also obviously product placement in vlogs, which again, inherently, I don't have a problem with. I don't inherently have a problem with people doing sponsorships or affiliates or whatever, but there are certain instances in which it's very obviously created explicitly for that purpose and only provides that. Like it does not provide value outside of that, and it doesn't ring true, I guess you could say. There can also really be that productivity content hidden in lots of other types of content, the advice videos, the lifestyle videos for sure. I feel like I keep saying this, but I don't have a problem with productivity content if you're being honest about what that is and you're not promoting like toxic mentalities. But I think for me, something that I have thought more about, and I'm still kind of working out my own mindset around it, of doing like goals and projects and working on specific things, because I am someone who can definitely benefit from some outside structure. It definitely has to be extremely flexible, and I'm still working out that balance as well. But, you know, I'm someone who can easily let everything in my life go absolutely to hell in a handbasket while I hyperfixate on something, usually because of how stressed I am about something else, a third secret thing. And so, you know, like right now I'm considering doing like a 12-week year, you know, type of project where I really try to create more sustainable habits. They're not even going to be habits. I don't know if I'm capable of forming habits, but like routines, I guess you could say. So, you know, that's definitely productivity content 100%. And I can implement that in vlogs and that sort of thing, but there are people who don't like that, maybe who don't want to watch that, and so I would want to be upfront in the presentation of that vlog to say like, hey, this is going to be me working on implementing systems, kind of resetting my life or whatever, so that if that's a type of content that doesn't work for you, that makes you feel bad or something like that, that you would potentially know just to not even click on it. And I think even more so with like advice videos or like things like that, you can really get that productivity mindset creeping in without advertising it as that. So anyway, just different things to think about while you're watching. If you want to think about it, also, you don't have to. You can just watch what you enjoy watching, and that's obviously totally fine. I do think that it's really interesting to see how the community is evolving, like even just in the past couple months. There are like, I think I can think of like 3 or 4 off the top of my head, people who in the past couple months have come out with clubs that are like about $20 a month and include a whole bunch of different like group activities for like aspiring polyglots and that sort of thing. And that's something that I had never seen before, and now all of a sudden that's like the new thing. Obviously, lifestyle content is becoming much more common in the community, and so I do think that this space is like evolving very rapidly, and so that's very interesting to see. And I think for the majority, I feel like most of it is positive, but there are obviously downsides to every type of content. So yeah, so thank you so much to everybody who responded to the survey. Sorry I didn't get to more of the responses reading them out here, but I did read and think about all of them, and so I greatly appreciate that. And please leave all of your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.